What's going on, everybody? Today we're going over 15 fantasy football players that I think are about to explode after week number 3. Starting it off with DeAndre Swift. Now we'll get into why I think Swift is going to explode right after I let you guys know that we are closing in on 1,600 subs. If you're new to this channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Been getting a lot of support lately, but back to DeAndre Swift. After week number 2 against the Vikings, I think it's very hard to believe that Swift's workload doesn't increase to some capacity. He had 28 carries for 175 yards and a touchdown. Personally, this is coming from an Eagles fan. I think he should be the starter over Kenneth Gainwell. I love Gainwell, don't get me wrong, but Swift is just the more explosive back, and I've been saying it all offseason. I think you got to be patient here in this situation. Week number 3, Gainwell and Swift are both going to be healthy. We're going to find out really what the Eagles want to do with these two backs in this upcoming week. On Thursday night, Boston Scott was getting a few touches here and there. Rashad Penny, in and out of the game. I don't know why, but the Eagles refused to use Rashad Penny. So that's a big question mark. I think Swift and Gainwell are the clear 1 and 2 options here. For the Philadelphia Eagles, when you're going against them, there is no winning. All right. Either you fully commit to stop the run. By the way, they have the #1 offensive line in the league. All right. Either you fully commit to stop the run, and then you're going to give up deep plays to Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, or you're going to play deep coverage, play your safeties deep, and try to prevent those big plays. And then you're just going to give up big runs to DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Gainwell because, like I said, they have the #1 offensive line in football. So if you have Swift, I'm feeling very comfortable heading into these next couple of weeks. He will be a fantasy stud coming up. Next up, George Pickens. After Pickens caught that 71-yard touchdown on Monday night against the Cleveland Browns, Pickett couldn't stop looking his way, which it should have been like that the entire game. But it was nice to see, nonetheless, after that touchdown, that Pickett, knew that he was on the field. All right, he finished the game with 10 targets, 4 catches, and 127 yards with a touchdown. It was never Allen Robinson, okay? On the waiver wire, some people were saying, "Oh, go pick up Allen Robinson." He's looking good out there. He had one good week. All right, George Pickens was always the guy ever since the offseason. I personally thought George Pickens could finish as the #1 wide receiver on the Steelers team, that is. That was before Deontay Johnson went down with an injury. I think it's all but a lock that George Pickens will lead this team in receiving at the end of the year because Deontay is on IR for at least 4 weeks here. Now, we talked about George Pickens in our players to trade for video. I think the best value for George Pickens was in week number 1 when he had kind of an off game. He didn't really see too many targets in that matchup. I think that was the best time to go trade for him. Pickens ran the most routes on the team on Monday and was on the field for just 1 less snap than Allen Robinson. I'm not worried about that whatsoever. Pickens is much more explosive and effective than Allen Robinson should be in these upcoming weeks. I want to see him really become Pickett's go-to option throughout this season. All right, year 2 breakout George Pickens. He needs to be the stud on this team. And Kenny Pickett needs to take that step forward as well. The first 2 games not looking amazing for Kenny Pickett. I want them to find the groove heading into these next couple of games here. Next up, we have Alexander Madison. Everybody and their mother is jumping on this Madison hate train right now. But look at his first 2 matchups. The Philadelphia Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers both have brutal defensive lines to go against. Tampa's defense is severely underrated, in my opinion. He did have some bad drops, I will say, against Philadelphia in the receiving game. But an NFL player is not going to come out and do that week after week after week. You got to expect some bounce back from Alexander Madison. He's heading into a very favorable matchup next week against the Los Angeles Chargers, and he has extra motivation to play well. These threats and these racial slurs coming from a couple drop passes and a bad fantasy performance is absolutely disgusting. That has no place. Come on now. Let's be real. It's honestly pretty pathetic. All right, that it's come to that. But I would go out and get Alexander Madison right now. I think it's one of the lowest points he's going to be at all year. He's still dominating the running back snap count on this team, so I'm not worried right now about Madison. If he doesn't perform well in these upcoming weeks, then I'd be stepping away from Madison and say, listen, we need to look at some trades for this guy. Next up, Anthony Richardson. This is your Justin Fields from last season. I said it in the last video. I'm going to say it again. You're looking at him right here. All right, 20.9 in week number 1, and he had 17.7 in week 2 in the second quarter. Before he got injured, he had a concussion. He went out of the game. Richardson's rushing ability is even better than most people imagined before this year started. All right. He's forming a nice connection with Michael Pittman, which is therefore raising his value as well, which is good to see. I think the situation with Jonathan Taylor being out is actually helping Richardson more because the Colts don't have to feel like they have to force feed Taylor. When Taylor's on the field, I think he's the best player on the Colts team. I don't think that's very arguable, but we're going to have a close second with Anthony Richardson right here. If you don't have a mobile quarterback on your current fantasy roster, maybe you have Joe Burrow, someone like that, you need to go out and try to trade for Anthony Richardson. He could be a league-winning quarterback heading into the rest of the year. I do have to say, though, please start sliding Anthony Richardson. All right, we need you to have a lengthy career. You can't end up like Antonio Brown over here. No CTE, please. Next up, we have Jamir Gibbs. Now, I understand the argument that some of you might have saying Montgomery's going to lead this team in carries, and I also think he's going to lead the team in carries once he's fully healthy. You don't pay a guy $18 million to just ride the bench behind a rookie pick. But if I was a head coach and I wanted to win games, I'm putting the ball in my best players' hands majority of the time. Now, Amon-Ra is clearly, as of right now, the number one player on this team, but Gibbs could easily slide into that number 2 best player role. Now, Montgomery might be out in week number 3. We are really going to get a preview of what Gibbs could be for the rest of the season. This game for Jamir Gibbs is even more important than most people realize. If he plays well, it's just going to solidify that he needs more touches even when David Montgomery comes back on the field. Next up, we have Mark Andrews. All right, he was the number 1 fantasy tight end in 2021, Lamar's go-to option heading forward. He had 8 targets in his first game back, which led the team. He was dealing with that quad injury that kept him out of the first game. He looked good in his second game. He plays at a position in fantasy football. The tight end position is potentially the most inconsistent position fantasy football-wise. There's about 5 good ones, and then all the rest are just toss-ups every single week. So I think you need to be starting him regardless of the matchup. Even if he gets you around 10 per game, you'll take that at the tight end position every single week. I think we're in store for much more than that, though, from Mark Andrews heading into the rest of this season. Another good sign is that he played the most snaps on the entire team, even after his injury. That should be a good indicator that he's good to go for these upcoming weeks and the rest of the season. Next up, we have Zay Flowers. All right, the Ravens really found something rare with Zay Flowers, in my opinion. He has been on the field for the most snaps through 2 games, which is very rare to see for a rookie. All right, most snaps on the Ravens team. Usually they get eased into the offense, but the Ravens are very smart. They see that this guy is capable of big play potential. He is so explosive. All right, he needs to be on the field as much as possible. The Ravens understand that. The best weeks, personally, I think are ahead for Zay Flowers, especially if he keeps getting this usage amount. All right, targets fell just a bit in week number 2. I think that was because of Mark Andrews coming back into the lineup. But I think there's a great chance moving forward that he is the number 2 option behind Andrews in Baltimore. I want in on Zay Flowers. If you do not have any shares of Zay Flowers in your leagues, I would go out and get him in at least one. You want to be a part of the Zay Flowers party for the rest of the year. Next up, we have CeeDee Lamb. All right, Lamb had a quiet week number 1. This was due to the absolute obliteration put on by the Cowboys defense against the New York Giants, 40-0 in game number 1. Obviously, you don't have to throw the ball a lot when they're just dominating and holding the other team to 0 points. He got back on track very nicely in week number 2 with 11 catches, 143 yards on 13 targets. The only negative, if there was one, is that he hasn't found the end zone yet this year. But every year in the league, CeeDee Lamb has increased his fantasy production, and I have no doubts that he can do the same this year. One more thing, we need to have the Cowboys defense relax a little bit, all right? We can't be holding every team to 0 to 10 points. We need these games to be competitive so that the Cowboys feel more need to throw the ball to CeeDee Lamb, please. Next up, we have Travis Kelce. This was really a no-brainer pick here. Good to see him back from that knee injury scare before week number 1. Usage in week number 2 was definitely limited, you could tell. All right, he played just 43 out of a possible 67 offensive snaps, which isn't normal for him. Normally, he's playing like 90 to 95% of snaps on offense, running almost every single route that he has the chance to. Going forward, he's going to be back to that Travis Kelce that you know and love, that you drafted in the first round of your fantasy football drafts this season. Also, I'm not worried about the weak performance against the Jags by the Chiefs at all. I think they always seem to pick it up midway through the year, late into the season. So Travis Kelce going forward is still going to be that tight end number 1 option for you. Next up, A.J. Brown. I am not worried about the first 2 weeks at all from A.J. Brown. All right, week 1, he had a decent week. It was rainy. It was sloppy. He still managed to have a fantasy viable performance, maybe save you a week and get you a win in fantasy. Week number 2 was a complete dud for his standards. A.J. Brown can be totally boom or bust at times, and that's something that you're going to have to deal with. If you drafted A.J. Brown, you had to have known this. All right, you saw it last season. He has some weeks where he'll drop 35 points. Other weeks, it's around 10. So Devontae Smith is the more consistent guy on this offense, in my opinion, in terms of fantasy floor at least. But A.J. Brown blows the roof off with his fantasy ceiling. Now, last week, you saw him getting a bit impatient with Jalen Hurts, not getting as many targets as he would have liked. I would expect that to rise in these upcoming weeks. He was on our trade target video this week for a reason. I think you go out, get A.J. Brown at one of his lowest points in the season. He's going to be a stud the rest of the year. Next up, we have Michael Thomas. All right, Michael Thomas is surprising a lot of people this year so far. Every season, people forget just how good Michael Thomas is because all they can think about is that injury. All right, he's going to get injured at some point. Listen, we don't know if that's going to happen. If it does happen, it sucks. All right, but are you willing to take the risk on Michael Thomas? Because when he is not injured, he plays very well. 2 weeks in so far, he's put up 2 solid performances, 11.1 and 12.5 PPR fantasy points. It's encouraging to see him running just as many routes and playing just as many snaps as Chris Olave, by the way. Olave is going to draw those number 1 corners away from Michael Thomas in this offense. And the Saints as a whole have a nice receiving core going with Olave, Michael Thomas, and Rashid Shaheed. Next up, I got Jerry Jeudy here. First week back from that hamstring injury in week 2. Played on 45 out of 66 offensive snaps. Still ran just 2 less routes than Cortland Sutton, which was promising to see. I'm expecting a hit to the fantasy production for about 1 to 2 more weeks, and then he gets fully back into the swing of things. Once he is fully healthy, he is Russell Wilson's clear number 1 option. He was a great fantasy player last year. I expect more of the same later on this season. Also, he has some very favorable matchups coming up against Miami, Chicago, the Jets, and the Kansas City Chiefs here. Next up, we got Kyron Williams. Personally, I wasn't expecting this type of usage for Kyron Williams. I don't think a lot of people were. He played on 76 out of a total 80 offensive snaps, which is unbelievable for the running back position. All right, he also caught 6 passes on 10 targets. Clearly, the Rams have no desire at all to keep Cam Akers on this team, and Ronnie Rivers is not really a threat to Kyron Williams' usage at this point. If Williams is going to keep getting this play time, 76 out of 80 snaps, I really can't get over that. If he's going to get almost every snap out of the backfield, I think his floor is so high that you can't bench this guy right now. He needs to be rostered in all leagues, by the way. There's still some leagues out there where he's on waiver wires. What are you guys doing? Go grab Kyron Williams if he's still available in your league. Next up, we have Jerome Ford. Nick Chubb, unfortunately, on Monday night went out with that gruesome leg injury. He is definitely done for the year. The next man up is Jerome Ford in this offense. All right, and the Browns clearly believe in him. They had the chance to go sign Kareem Hunt in this offseason again. They did not do so because they believe so much in Jerome Ford. The backup currently, unless they sign Kareem Hunt, is Pierre Strong Jr. I don't think he's going to be too reliable in fantasy football, but Jerome Ford is going to be extremely valuable later on in this year. All right, he has some tough matchups coming up. You just have to be patient with this guy. He's going against the Tennessee Titans, Baltimore Ravens, and San Francisco 49ers in these next couple of games. So very rough matchups. Like I said, stay patient. Do not drop him if his production dips a little in these next coming weeks. Also, the Browns are a great team to bet on for running backs. They have one of the best offensive lines in football, and Jerome Ford has some very favorable matchups towards the fantasy playoffs. So just keep that in mind. If you're playing the long game, Jerome Ford should be on your roster. Last but not least, we have Jalen Warren. All right, Najee Harris so far through these 2 games has been getting shut down every single time he's touched the ball. He had a couple big runs against the Browns, but every other time just swallowed up in the backfield. The offensive line looks unbearable for the Pittsburgh Steelers so far. Najee's had 5.3 in back-to-back games against the San Francisco 49ers and the Cleveland Browns. Granted, those are 2 tough matchups. The next 2 games, Pittsburgh is facing the Raiders and the Texans. If he can't perform in those, I'm really going out of my way to hunt down Jalen Warren and get him on some of my fantasy teams. Now, this is looking closer right now to a split backfield more than anything, where Warren is catching majority of the passes. I think Warren is the guy that you want at the moment, especially for his draft value. All right, Najee was about a 4th round pick in fantasy football. Jalen Warren, 8th, 9th, 10th round. So you're getting way better value out of Jalen Warren. I think he explodes in fantasy if he eventually does take over that starting role. We don't know if it's going to happen yet. Might not happen all year, but if it does, Jalen Warren is a man to watch out for. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video, drop a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're new, comment anything down below, any questions, lineup concerns, whatever the case may be. More than happy to answer. I will catch you in the next video, and good luck in week 3. Peace out.